Hi friends, I'm Olga Koelsch and welcome back to my studio. Today I'm very happy to share with you that my book How to Paint Transparent Flowers with Watercolor is already available for shipping. I'm very grateful for those who pre-ordered my book. I hope you will receive it in the very coming days and I hope you enjoy it. For today's class, I prepared a very easy introduction to painting in transparent technique. I hope you will enjoy the process. It will be very relaxing. Even if you haven't painted with watercolor before, you will manage it. So let's start.
Before we start to painting, I would recommend you to find the center of your piece of paper and map out the fields, so when we are painting you would not get out of your paper, so your painting will fit in, because once you're in the process things can go very differently from what you expected. So now I would like to paint monochrome today, and I will use Meadow Lake Deep. It's a warm red, violet, red purple color, a little bit desaturated, muted. It can be, I think, in almost of your palettes. I dilute it with water, pretty nice amount of water. And for today's lesson I use very soft squirrel brush, and I start with the first petal. I set up a puddle, small little puddle. I wash my brush, and with very watery brush I distribute all the color into the sides. So I'm creating a petal, and I try to dilute more and more my mix while I'm moving from the flower center to the edges. And now you see how helpful it was to map out the fields, because right now I'm in the mood to move on and move on. I don't do much. I want to see how my flower will evolve by itself. But not to waste time, I will paint another petal. Same principle. I set up a big, nice puddle with colored water. Then I wash my brush. It's a soft brush, it's squirrel brush. It holds nice, it holds a very nice amount of water in the hair part. So that allows you to paint pretty long with this brush. But anyway, I very often wash it, so I have more gentle color at the tips of the petals. I would like to add a little bit of crispiness, so I go into my color, and with the tip of the brush I add a little bit of color just in the very bottom part. This time I purposefully don't go into details. I just observe how my watercolor will do its job. Here it's an important moment. You see a small little puddle. If I leave it here, when it dry, it will push the color, the pigment back, and it will create these spiderweb signs. If you like it, you can leave it. If you don't like it, for example, you need to dry your brush, hold your brush a little bit up, and go very carefully into the puddle, and all the water will go into the hairy part of your brush. Next petal. Same principle, we start right here. I wash my brush, but I keep my brush pretty wet, and I'm creating petals. Just very freehand, just how it goes. I don't imagine any specific flower. Might be a poppy, so we'll see how it will go. And each and every accidental splash and everything what's happening now, it's very welcome, because it will create a nice texture at the very end. You can add a little bit of bolder color, of the same bolder color, Meadow Lake Deep, at those spots, at the previous petals which started to dry out. So to create a very nice center of the flower. And you see how intense it gets when when the paper is almost dry, and how it is barely diluting when it is still wet. Right now, before I start to paint the next layer of next overlapping petals, I need to dry this previous layer completely, and I will use a hairdryer for that. For the next layer, I repeat the same principle, but I'm painting over our petals. You can move your paper how it is convenient to you. So I'm starting to shaping the next petal with my brush. I try to move my brush very gentle, so not to disturb the previous layers, and to create some nice flow. You can remove a little bit the pigment from the middle of the petal and add a bit of bold and dry color along the sides. This technique will help to create very crispy, defined edges. In my book, How to Paint Watercolor Transparent Flowers, I go more into details. I try to portray flowers, mostly realistic. So I study botanical structure of the flower. But if we use the same technique and paint a little bit freehand, we can also get very interesting, awesome results. Now I need to dry this part too. Next petal. Next petal, I would like to overlap all the previous petals and being a little bit of different. So my paper start to fold a bit, but that's all right. If this is too annoying to you, you can glue your paper with paper type right onto your desk, for example. I try to distribute water evenly in the petal area. I want to add some folds imitation. For this purpose, I have a little bit of color on the tip of my brush, and then I slide it down just like this. And this will create these idea of veins or a little bit of folded area in the petal. Now I want to play a little bit more with crispiness, so I go directly into my box of paints and add a few crispy edges, crispy drops along the petal. I don't apply pressure. I try to keep my brush pretty relaxed in my hand, and I leave everything as it is. I decided to completely trust my watercolor, my brush, and see what will happen here. One thing I recommend you to have a control on is to always check the previous layers. They need to be completely dry before you switch to another layer. I would like to add one more petal here on the other side. Let's see. I think would be nice to add more of intersected area. I wash my brush and I go along the edge very quickly before paints getting dry, and you see it's happening pretty quick. So I just go and distribute it a little bit. I will take very bold paint right from my palette, and I will go along the edge, stepping here and there, adding details, adding more of boldness. In some areas I would like to repeat this trick with veins. I just choose the spots where it can be more evident, and I slide my brush down together with this paint, and we'll see how it creates all these textures. I very much like these super bold accidental drops here and there, so I'm going to add a little bit more. At the very bottom, for example. I add more and more details on front petals because our first petals, they underneath the other layers, and they already a little bit disappearing here and there, so there was not so much sense to paint details for them. But the more you move forward with this technique, the more fun details, like splashes, veins you can add to your picture, to your petal. I dry my brush with a paper towel, and I want to play around this area to water it a little bit, and I hope it will dry in a nice way which watercolor likes to dry out. Now I'm thinking of painting the final petal, and I imagine it will be in this area, a little bit on the front. So I bathe my brush in my pink mix, and I map out the petal with very, very, very wet brush. So I will have enough time and enough water to finish this wash. Something like this. In these areas with bold details, you see how it started to disappear. to dilute the previous layers. So I'm very careful with my brush. I try not to go much into these specific areas, but I want to lighten a little bit this part. And now comes probably mine for sure, and probably yours favorite part, is to add in these crispy, fun outlines, adding details. You can even add, it's our final petal, you can play around with details so as much as you would like. Nothing will disappear after that. So you can try, for example, tipping moves that creates this fluffy texture, or you can just make one little drop, maybe even in the middle of the petal. Everything what creates this freehand feeling is always very, very great. I'd like to add a little bit of boldness in the very middle, but not too much, not to overdo it. I wash my brush, and I really want to add one of these veins right here, one or two. And this is enough. To draw a stem, there are several options. You can use just a pencil, and for example, if you don't feel confident, it's always a good idea to help yourself and map out the future stem. You can use one of gel pens or a marker with a fine tip. I will take just a fine brush. You can use ink, for example, ink pen, anything what you're happy to try, what you would like to do. I use just neutral tint. I find flower center, and I would like to start a little bit underneath the petal. I draw it with the tip of the brush, just a very fine line, and at the very end I will make a very sharp move, so it will create also this very hand painted idea, the texture. I look at my flower and I think I'm very happy with what we painted together today.
Thank you so much for painting with me. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope I inspired you to paint transparent flowers with me. Please let me know in comments which flower you would like to paint next, what troubles you have with watercolor, what advices maybe you will like to hear. I read each and every comment, and I'm very helpful for your constant support. See you next time. Bye bye.